What's up, everyone? We're the Brothers War EDH. Welcome back to the Brotherhood, the place where we analyze every angle to help you improve and optimize your EDH decks. I'm joined here by my wonderful co-host, C Daddy. He's back.
Daddy's back,
You wanted
baby.
Disgusting.
C
And-
Daddy. I hate C Daddy, by the way. Ever since the last episode, I've gotten so much.
You've been flamed for C Daddy.
But you know what? C Daddy's back. I mean, what else is there to say? You know what I mean?
You flamed him, but he's back.
A
He's
lot
still
of
here.
other things. A lot of other things could be said.
What about B Daddy?
No, disgusting.
Okay.
I was gonna say also here B Daddy, but I'm glad you said it instead of me.
Disgusting.
We have Blake Johnson. Y'all, this guy has been making the waves, man. Everyone just loves what Blake has to say. It's crazy. He was stitched on TikTok, people.
Was
First
he
time I've
really?
ever seen. Yeah, he
Oh, wow.
was. It was awesome.
All right. I should keep up more
He's
with
the
you,
man.
Blake.
We're here today to bring up a very, very spicy, a very, very incredibly controversial topic in EDH/Commander. How to help determine how many lands you need in your EDH/Commander decks. I know a lot of people got a lot of opinions on this, and we do too. As a disclaimer, these are our opinions. I'm not telling you just to adopt this because, people are probably going to hate some of the things we got to say on here. So I just want to open up with a question. In the current day of EDH/Commander, do the majority of people really think about the optimal amount of lands for their deck? What do y'all think?
I think, okay, let me preface by saying this. The reality, just by nature of Commander, right, is that you just can't sit down and have a deck with 0 lands and expect to have a good play experience, right? 0 lands, right? On the flip side, you can't expect to sit down with 99 lands and your commander and expect to have an impact on the game. So I recognize that, like we talked about, there's going to be some things such as running an Azusa where you can drop multiple lands per turn, or, take the 99 lands. All these niche cases, you have all these multiple double face cards now. You can basically essentially count those as lands. But I'm just talking about generally speaking. So the question is, where's the line? Where's the line? How do we find that balance? How do I come to the conclusion that I need to be running X amount of lands in my commander deck?
So people normally don't ask those questions.
Oh,
They're
no,
just like,
no. Blake,
yeah.
what do you think?
No, of course not. Most people listen. When it comes to thinking, I think EDH as a whole is full of people that will just use active resources like EDH, the favorite YouTube channel, and they'll be like, how many lands should I run resource? I don't want to use my brain. I don't want to think. I don't want to analyze my own deck that I'm putting together. I want some outside source to tell me what to do. And ultimately, that's how you fail at deck building. You yourself have to think about your strategy, the specific cards you have in your deck, and how they apply to your optimal lands.
Agreed.
So pretty much just like copy pasta is what we're saying. People just go on there on these sites. They're just like, oh yeah, you're telling me I need to play 40. You're telling me I need to play 35, 37, whatever that number is, and they just slap that number into their decks.
Yeah, and they don't take into consideration the speed of the format shifting. They don't take into consideration how Magic has evolved over time and how things are becoming faster. Mana costs are becoming lower, and 36 to 40 lands is becoming an opportunity cost that you just can't. When you're looking to optimize and eke out that advantage, it starts to become a pretty significant detriment to your deck.
EDH is no longer 7 mana combat creatures. That's not the landscape we play in anymore. Can it be? Sure. But for the most part, any random game you get into is not going to be dictated by 8, 9, 10 mana spells. It's going to be
it can. The problem is that it's just cheated out more often than not.
Yes,
You're not going to be casting them for 8, 9, and 10. You're going to be casting them for Crater Hoof Behemoths for 4 with a natural order or something like that.
That is correct. It's not. EDH is no longer land go. It's you need to be mana efficient, and you need to have cards all the way up the curve. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind in mana efficiency nowadays.
Yeah, they just take the number, they slap it in there. They don't really think about like, am I running too many, or in cases, am I running too few? So we kind of see how most players just have a general consensus around just picking a number, but we definitely want to get past that by by finding the right amount of lands to get to our game plan. So kind of the first thing, why using specific amounts of lands is not as optimal as actually knowing your deck and trying to find the right amount of land. So going to the pros about the specific land count for decks. So like, let's say someone was like, yeah, let's just throw 36 lands in all my decks, 37 lands in all my decks. It is easier for new players and newer deck builders because you have the same constant over and over again, and you don't really have to think about it.
It's safe.
Yeah, it's safe. Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
I mean, like, your deck will be functional with more lands than not, so it's safe.
You're consistently hitting land drops and playing your spells throughout the game, and you're not really worrying about potentially not having enough lands to cast your spells. But if you do end up being flooded, it's like, okay, well, whatever. At least I was able to continue with my game plan. Some of the cons that I have here, and y'all feel free to jump in on this. Obviously, specific strategies, mana curves, power levels. Some of them require more or less lands.
There comes a point in the game where having extra lands drawn becomes an opportunity cost. You're not able to have gas in your hand, but instead you're drawing a land, which if you already have other lands in your hand because you fill your deck with so many, you can only play one land a turn. So at that time, that's just an opportunity that's being cost. Again, trying to find that perfect balance between spells and lands is extremely important because, again, we can only play one land per turn. We've got multiple turns, maybe 8, 9, 10 turns. When you're drawing lands off the top deck on 8, 9, and 10, I don't have a statistic on it, but I would say that your chance to win is likely going to be lower.
Yep.
Again, it goes back to the idea of efficiency. And what I mean by efficiency is every turn, assuming you hit a land drop, on turn 1, you have 1 mana to spend. If you don't spend it, you've lost it. If you, on turn 2, you play a second land, you have 2 mana. You don't spend it, you've lost it. So you've now lost 3 potential mana you could have used to further your board, whereas if your opponents are being more mana efficient and actually using their mana on spells, even if they happen to miss a land drop, if they're still using their mana effectively, they're progressing their board and actually adding to their win percentage, whereas you're just sitting there making land drops doing nothing.
Yeah. I'm going to take a word out of Blake's vocabulary. Ultimately, what he's trying to say is game actions win games, land drops don't win games. At the end of the day, game actions are what win games. You making a land drop doesn't necessarily win you a game. It helps you win a game, but you can drop 10 lands in a row. If you're not using that mana, you ain't winning that game. So the question is, the really question is, what really matters when with land counts or when casting spells? Is it land drops, or is it the amount of resources that you have available to you to actually play those cards?
Well, I mean, that's particularly relevant when you're thinking about lands, because, again, there's multiple factors when you need to think about your land count. You need to think about card draw. You need to think about how many ramp sources you have. You need to think about your overall mana curve. Because, again, there's a point that in your deck, you no longer need to make land drops to hit multiple spells in a turn. And basically, at that point, that is what I would consider an inflection point where the top of your deck no longer needs to be a land. And if you draw a land, that is actively bad for you. So the question comes for deck builders, how many lands do I get in my deck to effectively reach that inflection point while drawing the lowest amount of lands possible?
One of the biggest cons that I think about having a specific land count is that you're not, you don't have to really think about your deck, which then acts as a crutch because, if you really understand your deck and like what Blake was saying, finding the inflection point, like what Chris was saying, finding opportunity costs, you're missing out on that value. And there's so many other things that kind of cascade down the line where, you know, you might be losing like good tempo, you're not getting to your game plan faster than like other people, you're drawing lands, not hitting key spells to be able to get you to where you want to go. So going into pretty much the next part of this discussion, we've been talking about this phrase inflection point. Can y'all define what inflection point is for the viewers?
So when we speak about inflection point, what we're really talking about is how many lands does it take for you to start performing 2 game actions a turn? So what do I mean by game actions? So because you can argue that a land drop is a game action, not necessarily what we're talking about. We want things that affect the board. So what we really mean in this scenario is one major one is going to be spells. So if you can double spell in a turn, that's what we're looking for. But if my commander has an activated ability, if you spell into activated ability, that theoretically affects the board, pushes your strategy forward. So that is the same thing. One caveat I also want to make is if you're specifically a landfall deck and you are making multiple land drops that create actions, so Tatiova, drawing a card, you know, any of the other landfall pays offs, those are game actions that push your strategy forward and are winning you the game. So this discussion is not necessarily just telling you everyone is running too few lands. What we're asking you to think is how many lands is optimal for your strategy based on how many more game actions you are putting to stack that are eventually going to win you the game. So that is the question that we are trying to ask. How many lands is optimal to increase the amount of game actions that you are doing without drawing extraneous lands that are going to reduce the amount of game actions that you are performing?
Exactly. Well put.
We have a list of factors that we like to use to dictate where we can be able to get to this inflection point. Starting off, you know, you obviously got to start off with a baseline number of lands. You know, the first one obviously is card advantage or card draw. You know, depending on your deck, obviously you want to run as much card draw to be able to get to the things that you need.
Land count is more of a byproduct of how much card draw you have in the deck, because the reason why we talk about card draw is because when you have a hand and you have no lands in your hand, you're not playing a land that turn. Card draw increases the probability that you'll have lands in your hand to play. So again, we're talking about early turns. If you can get those card advantage engines early as turn 1, 2, you increase the chance with a lower land count that you'll be able to have those lands to play on subsequent turns.
And it also dictates where if you have more lands than you necessarily need based on the amount of card draw you have, they're just going to sit in your hand. So those are not useful because, again, like Chris said, our format outside of specific stipulations can only play 1 land a turn. So if I have 8 lands in my hand and I've already played my land for turn, unless I have an effect that lets me use those lands, I might as well not have them in hand. So my hand size is overall reduced because that is not a game action I can take this turn. I've already played my land. So all those lands in my hand are effectively worthless. Yes, I can play them next turn, but I'm only looking at this one turn. I might as well have a hand that has no cards in it if that's all that's in there.
Exactly. You'd need to have card draw on your deck regardless. Like, this is another topic we'll talk about probably more in depth, is the amount of card draw you have in your deck. But again, like, the more card draw you have, the more chance you're likely to be able to cut a land. Depending on how many lands you want to cut, we got to talk about how much card draw you actually have in your deck. Whether your commander is a card advantage engine, that's huge. We'll talk about that in later videos, but yeah.
It's a game of statistics, baby. The more card draw you have, the overall less lands you need because you are seeing more than 1 card a turn, like our format dictates. So that allows you to cheat on the math. So if you have however many card draw engines you have or how many card draw spells you have, that is directly correlated to the amount of lands that you need to be running. Now, again, there are specific caveats. So like in a landfall deck, again, don't think about it as land drops, think about it as game actions. If you can turn your lands into game actions, great, that's super good. But if you can't, and you are like most normal decks where you are playing 1 land a turn, they are no longer game actions that actually push your strategy forward.
And you need to reevaluate how many lands you need to be running.
Correct.
Moving on from card draw, because we can talk about card draw all day, but the second one that we have on here is average CMC or mana value. How can y'all explain how this factors into how many lands you should have in your deck?
I think curve is the most important. When it comes to curve and land drops and hitting this so-called inflection point, the lower your curve, the lower the inflection point. That is just mathematically sound. If you have an average curve of 2 mana cost, you only need 4 lands to begin your quote-unquote double game action per turn. So I need significantly less lands than if my curve is, for example, 5. So in that scenario, if my average curve is 5, I need 10 lands to start double game actioning. That is significantly different and requires significantly more lands to allow for that specific thing, disregarding the other factors that we've talked about. If you're only considering curve, an average converted mana cost of 2 versus an average mana cost of 5 is a world of difference in terms of how many lands a deck needs. It also plays into mana efficiency as well. So the lower your curve, the more mana efficient you can be. Because again, if we take our example that I talked about, if you have an average converted mana cost of 5, on turn 6, 7, 8, 9, you are losing all that mana because your average converted mana cost is 5, because in that scenario, you need 10 lands to double spell or double game action. So you are wasting all that land, wasting all that mana, and it's just adding on, whereas your opponents are going to be more mana efficient than you. But if you look at the deck with 2 converted mana costs being its curve, they can begin double actioning much earlier and can even triple action a lot earlier, which again, theoretically those spells are going to be less impactful, but you're going to be doing more of them more often, and that is going to be what wins you games. But that converted mana cost of 2 needs to have significantly less lands because they hit that inflection point earlier, so they don't want lands like the 5 converted mana cost. So that's why I think it's by far the most important, because I think that one specifically dictates what your starting lands can be, and then you can look at the other categories to then start to morph them from there. But I think mana curve is where, okay, I've got this converted mana cost average, I need to start with this many lands, and then I can adjust based on the other categories we're going to talk about.
Honestly, both of them are very important, which is why we have this list. Like, if you can be able to find this inflection point using all of these, the efficiency of your deck is just going to increase. It's all just this like big melting pot of things that in the end, the final product of getting to that inflection point is going to increase. The third thing that we're going to talk about here is ramp.
The ramp kind of takes 2 avenues you need to look at. First off, you need to look at how much does your ramp cost. Second off, you need to look at how many sources you have, because what ramp allows your deck to do is quote-unquote cheat towards our inflection point, because it's putting mana sources into play. So as you play mana rocks and play lands, you're effectively doubling how fast you're reaching our inflection point, which again lowers the amount of lands that you would need, because you are hitting that inflection point faster, which allows you to begin taking more additional game actions, which is, as we've continued to reiterate, how games are won. So as you add ramp sources, you are effectively adding ways to get to that inflection point, so you can again look at how many lands you have and take that number down if you feel that is correct, because you're reaching that point faster.
It's just a component to have a more efficient deck. It's trying to get to where you can be able to take multiple game actions in a turn. We're not trying to tell you to lower your land so that you can win the game faster. Definitely not trying to tell you to run 30 lands and hope you expect to win faster than everyone else.
It's all about efficiency, because your game actions can be different. So CEDH, they have different game actions. They're trying to accomplish a different thing. In my casual geared deck, that means something completely different. It's how many rhinos can I put into play. It's how many populate triggers can I get. That is completely different than the game action of Demonic Consultation, Thassa's Oracle. It's just, it's still 2 game actions, but those game actions are completely different and cause different effects. So regardless of your what you perceive to be your level of play, whether it be battle cruiser, mid, high, casual, or CEDH. More game actions is good no matter the play level. It's just, it has nothing to do with quote unquote winning. It has more to do with how you progress your board state. It can be winning, but it does not necessarily mean winning.
Right.
So it's not that we're encouraging you to, demonic consultation, Thassa's Oracle the table because you have less lands. That's not what we're getting at here. We're talking about efficiency and overall reducing the amount of dead draws in your deck in the late game. So I think one thing that's not necessarily dictating land count, but is something that I think needs to be talked about when it comes to lands and that sort of thing is how our format mulligans. And I can tell you one thing, you're not mulliganing enough.
Nope.
Look me in the eyes. You're supposed to mulligan more. That's the
Yes.
whole point. Our format, you get one free mulligan. Everyone's like, but past that, cannot mulligan. I hear too many games. They're like, well, this hand's slow, but I'll keep it because it has lands. That is not producing game actions that are gonna win the game. Mulliganing to 6 and having a better hand that actually does something and progresses your board is way better than keeping a 7 that does nothing. So, just the format as a whole needs to stop being so afraid of mulligans. The London mulligan is so broken. You see 7 cards regardless of how many times you're mulliganing, and you can keep which ones you want. It heavily incentivizes mulliganing more, but everybody is so critically afraid of losing that 1 or 2 card when really the way that we deck build allows us to be more aggressive with mulligans because you can have more card draw engines. The games last longer. You can draw more cards to get you out of that deficit, and the way you do that is by mulliganing into a stronger hand. On average, you should not be keeping a 7 that does nothing.
I think that's something that the community values in terms of the mulligan is, okay, well, I don't want to lose tempo by not having, and by like not playing a land drop every single turn. I think that there's a lot of people that would say something like, oh, well, if you're not continuously playing lands and increasing your mana every single turn, then eventually you're not going to have enough to cast your spells. But like what you're saying, I've definitely done this before. Like I kept hands that were like five lands, 2 spells, and they, even times those cards weren't doing anything until like, turn 4 or 5. And yeah, I was playing lands, but I wasn't doing anything. But the thought process that I had was like, oh, well, if I have the lands later, knowing that I can hit these lands now, then yeah, I'll be able to, to probably do something. But more times than not, it did not end up being that way. I would have nothing and somebody would just be way ahead, or I would draw into potentially more lands, and that's very bad right there.
That is a trap mentality. Keeping 5 land with 2 4-drops, you might as well not play the game. Because as our EDH format moves forward and you play with more efficient and more and as design moves on, you've got more impactful cards. More games of EDH are dictated by the first 1 to 5 turns than ever before. And if you don't produce anything until turn 4, fucking scoop your cards up and go home.
We're gonna dive a lot more into mulligans because it is a skill. It's not just something that a pregame action that you do. It's a skill that needs to be learned and practiced more. And we will dedicate a whole episode based off of mulligans.
We believe that there's not one specific number. We want to be at this mindset where we're looking into our deck. We know the 99. And through that, we can be able to use the things that we talked about: card draw, average CMC, ramp, mulliganing. All of these play a factor into getting into that inflection point to where you're doing more than one game action a turn, and eventually being able to get to your game plan as fast as you can to eventually win the game. Because believe it or not, this game is about killing your opponents. So
yeah, it's not likely that you're going to find, oh, I need to be running exactly 28 or 35 lands and it's like perfect. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is stop being lazy, think for yourself, figure out ways you can optimize your deck and get close. You can get closer. It could be a range between 29 and 31. Test things out, goldfish your deck, and just try to get a little bit closer to that margin. Just saying, oh, I'm going to run 36 lands in this deck, that's not cutting it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that being a starting point, but us as deck builders, and if you want to actually get better at playing the game of Magic instead of being concerned with, the other things that sometimes our format is concerned with, if you yourself want to better yourself as a Magic player, part of half of the game is the deck you bring to the table, and you need to look at it, optimize it, and decide what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with a starting point, but you can't just decide that that is what I'm doing for the rest of eternity, no matter what cards come in and out. As you make changes, that number changes, and your land should reflect that. If you brought in 3 card draw engines at some point, your land should reflect that. It should not stay 36.
Man, that's such a good point.
You need to identify how your deck is currently built, and if you make changes, you need to basically look at the entire deck. One card change to a deck could dictate multiple different changes that need to be made. You need to look at the color density. So if you're a 5-color deck, color density is a huge question. So that's another thing we didn't even talk about when it comes to lands is color requirements. If I have white, green, red, and I have 3 2 and I've got 6 2-drops, 2 of them being double red, 2 of them being double white, 2 of them being double green, that dictates the different number of land, or that dictates the types of lands in my deck that I need to be running. So there's a huge well we can go down when it comes to deck building that people just take for granted and don't actually think about, that you can use to make yourself a better Magic player and increase your win percentage.
Exactly. If everybody sits down at the table and everybody has a 25% chance to win, and you start with a higher chance because everybody else is running a suboptimal land base and you're tight on your mana base, but you know the reasons why, I feel like that raises your percentage by, even by 1 to 2%, and decreases theirs by quite a bit. So
I won't claim the percentage, but it gives you a higher chance to win, which again, depending on how you engage with this format, I don't sit down at the table to, look at everybody's deck and have a good time. I'm trying to play my game of Magic and try to execute my plan. Right. And if I start with a higher win percentage because I took the time to deck build properly, that's good for me.
Right. Stop complaining, start complying is what we say.
And
listen, just don't the EDH mindset I feel nowadays is be a sheep. Go to EDH Rec and find a deck and download it and play. Do not be a sheep, be a wolf. Look at your deck, make changes. Understand why the deck is built the way it is and why you have the specific engines and cards in it. If you don't do that, why even play the format?
So I mean,
relax.
See. Here's the thing is that people play for
it's the way I engage with the game. What do you want from me?
Right. People play for like different reasons, but this whole this podcast and really a lot of the episodes and the content that we want to put regarding deck building does go towards the people that want to go the extra mile. They want to increase win percentage. They want to increase efficiency.
Be a sheep when you first start. I would recommend more a sheep than a wolf when you get started into Magic, because you need to learn the mechanics of the game. You need to learn how things interact with things, and sometimes you can't waste your mental capacity on trying to figure out how to build a deck when you don't even know what rates are of cards and different things like that. So I would I would say you need to be both, but eventually shift that change into a sheep and make yourself a grimy.
I hate where this is going. Please stop. Please stop.
Yes, sir.
But yes, there is nothing wrong with how anybody interacts with the game, but our channel specifically is built around deck building and how we interact with the game and how we try to progress our mindset forward. So that's what we're talking about here.
All right, boys. That was a great discussion about land counts. I want to end our time here with our final segment, the hot take section. I know that like a lot of people love hearing some good hot takes.
My hot take of the week is unban every single card in Magic the Gathering Commander.
This can be a whole podcast episode.
Ooh, I don't know. Hold on now. I don't know about that one.
Oh, that's why it's called a hot take, Blake. That's why it's called a hot take.
You want to unban?
I want to unban Moxes. I want to unban everything in Commander. Why do you say this, Chris? Why are we banning things? Blake, I got a question for y'all. Why are we banning things?
This is such this is such a broad topic
Yeah,
to
it's
discuss.
very-
Yeah, it is.
but-
It is. But essentially, what is the main reason why there's bans in Commander?
Well, I mean, Wizards' reasons for freaking bannings is like play experience. Freaking Golos, like, what are we doing? Come on.
Okay, play experience. Okay, Blake, what you got?
Ultimately, I align with the thought that there are certain designed cards that probably should not exist. So, for example, Chaos Orb. Not a card that should really be played based on its mechanics. There's a specific reason why that card is banned. Mox are only banned because they're basically broken design. Things should not cost 0 mana and generate mana. So in terms of what can and cannot be unbanned, I would much rather unban the Moxen than I would like something like Chaos Orb or any of the anti-cards, for example. Like, I think those are banned for an actual reason because they actually interact with a real-life instance. Because if the viewers are not aware, Chaos Orb is basically a card that you would drop and anything it touches would be destroyed. So what people used to do was you would tear up your Chaos Orb and you would throw it like dust and it would touch basically everything. So that is banned for a specific reason.
So do you think that's a ban? Do you think that's a bad play experience? That could be fun for some people.
No, I don't think it's a bad play experience for the game. I think it's bad in the real world because you're actually destroying a card. It's the same thing.
Well-
Why I think antis are bad, because you actively cannot play the game unless you quote unquote anti a card from your deck. I think that is not where the game that we're trying to play, I think.
Yeah. I think it's more about you're taking external things that don't pertain to the actual playing of the game, taking a card, tearing it up, and then tossing it over cards, and it that has nothing to do with like kind of like how your deck is really made or nothing within the game. It's literally external.
Yeah,
And
I think those cards are specifically different. Whereas if you're looking at Mox, Gristlebrand, Emrakul, sure, fucking unbanned.
Yeah, hey,
dude,
that's what I
day.
mean. Like the ones. Okay, so let me rephrase that then. Chaos. I actually don't. I'm okay with Chaos Orb coming off, but like the anti cards, I can see. Hey, keep those off. Black Lotus, Chaos Orb. That's a choice that you have to make if you want to destroy your own card. That's not. I mean, I don't think it should be banned just because the potential reason someone's destroying a card. I think that's someone else's decision.
You're also doing it one time because what are the odds you have like another Chaos Orb?
but again,
but then you also have to think about how that interacts with the gameplay, because technically once that Chaos Orb is destroyed, it's in the graveyard, but now it's all fucking dust and shit. So what happens when you like recur it and stuff? And I think there is a reason that card is not...
This is what you do: is you print 18,000 proxies, since proxies are such a thing now, and that's how you use your Chaos Orb.
Dude,
I mean, that doesn't like it. Like, there's ways to get around it without keeping it without keeping it banned.
I will disagree with you. I think that one stays on the ban list with the anti cards.
Okay,
the rest of them,
but everything else, they need to come off. As far as this isn't breaking anything but possibly CEDH, but right now the thing is you're always going to have a bar, you're always going to have a standard. Okay, banning things. There's going to be if you ban Dockside Extortionist right now, there's going to be a new thing that comes up that's going to be the new broken thing, and it's just going to keep being like that. It's always going to correct itself. So let things go free. I mean, it's really the only thing that it's going to affect the most is CEDH. It's not going to really affect casual Commander.
Yeah, as far as bans, I think a lot of those cards can definitely come out. But there's some cards I'm just like, why is this still banned? Because even if they
it's Coalition Victory,
Primetime Coalition Victory,
Hull Breacher,
friggin' Biorhythm.
Hull Breacher should not be banned. Come on now.
Hull Breacher should not be banned.
There's so much more. There's so much more broken things than Hull Breacher.
It's a bad play experience for the casual.
It's a bad play experience.
You know what else is a bad play experience? Stasis.
Can't argue with that one.
Can't argue with that one.
Saying? Like, come on.
Can't argue with that one.
Yeah, I'd rather ban Stasis over freaking Golos.
I was about to say Stasis might be worse than Hull Breacher.
I mean, yes, I would absolutely agree.
So, like, stop it. Why? Like,
Hull Breacher in itself is really only broken with wheels. Hull Breacher
exactly.
is fine.
So, it's something about bans that I think that a lot of people bring up is like variance, right? I think that people have this thought where if if the most broken cards were unbanned, that like everybody would be playing with that card in their deck with a specific strategy. I was looking at like some of those unbanned C EDH decks, and a lot of them were playing either the same colors or they were playing the same strategy. It was like tinker into time vault, trying to take infinite turns, kind of deal. You got the mocks and whatever.
I mean, CEDH does the same. Thoughts of Oracle, demonic consultation.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying. There's a new standard that's going to be coming out with every ban. These games.
The argument, though, is that so if Time Walk is unbanned, basically every blue deck now plays Time Walk. Like that's the
thing.
That's the concern, I think.
Yeah,
now,
but
me personally, am I fine with that? Maybe. I mean, I think that's where then you're going to get into the discussion of do I actually want to put this in my deck, and what like level is my deck trying to play at? But again, I think that's where there is a conversation about proxies and actual like cost of cards, because I think it's a lot less fun and engaging if not everyone can have the game pieces. And especially like once you start going to quote unquote sanctioned events and that sort of thing where proxies are not an avenue you can take, it's going to feel particularly bad to sit across from the 5 Mox player with a Black Lotus and the best you have is a Soul Ring. That is, I think, from a gameplay perspective alone, basically everything can come off the ban list. But I think the ban list has more than just design and gameplay in its consideration, and that is ultimately why it still exists.
Here, this is what I propose: unban everything for a year or 2 years maximum. See how the format corrects itself, and then ban based off of those results.
I think you could do that for a lot of cards. I think you don't want to do it for everything.
Yeah, because that would also kind of like affect the.
Well, the thing is, the point is you have to do it with everything, because you have to see how everything how having access to everything affects it.
Sure.
You can't just say, I'm not going to unban. I'm going to unban everything but Time Walk and see what happens. You know what I mean?
You absolutely could do that.
I mean, you could.
What the fuck do you mean you can't do that? You definitely could do that.
I mean, there's also the stuff about the cost of cards, like the Magic economy. How unbanning that would cause a lot of those cards to either. See, that's the thing, is that.
Well, they're already fucking unobtainable for basically 99.5% of all the thing. Which again, that's where it comes into the proxy conversation. But I think until
refer to last week's video.
Until Wizards specifically allows proxies in sanctioned events, I think that is an irrelevant conversation.
Yeah,
because
that's very true.
You still have to think about it from a sanctioned, obviously kitchen table Magic, you can write on a piece of paper and nobody gives a shit. But at the end of the day, there is something to be said that Wizards does not respect proxies, and like some people just don't like using proxies. So there is a conversation about cost that needs to be taken into consideration, I think.
So y'all, you heard it from us here about land counts. If you have any comments about that, please be sure to leave them in the comments section. We're also on Spotify as well. We got the first episode on Spotify. You can also comment on this episode over there. And even the comments about unbanning everything. I think that that's something that everyone loves to talk about. It's one of those spicy takes that. You either want it or you don't. But I also want to take this time to thank our patrons on our Patreon. Link will be in the description below. Brian Chambers, Jay Giggs, and Drew Garth. We love you guys. Thank you for continually supporting this channel on Patreon. We are going to get an Ixalan game coming. We also got spoilers coming out for that sometime in October, so be on the lookout for those. We're going to continue to do this podcast. If y'all have any topics that y'all might want us to to talk about, let us know in the comments. We love to reach out. We also have our Discord in the link as well. Feel free to reach out to us through there with anything you want to talk about.
Maybe we can delve into those salty mines.
Salty Minds.
Shout out Howling Salt Mine.
Oh yeah, I love you guys. Love you guys. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe on the YouTube, share the Spotify. If it's easier for you to do that, for people to find our stuff. If you like it, do y'all have anything else y'all want to say before we end?
Yeah, I love you, Blake.
Thank you.
C Daddy loves B Daddy.
C Daddy, heart B Daddy.
God, Jesus, kill me.
Thank you all for listening. We appreciate you. Again, get better.
Identify the changes you can make in your deck to make it more optimal.
There you go. Blake summed it up for me.
Introspection. We are the Brothers War. We will see y'all on the next one. Goodbye.